Welcome, weary travellers. My name is Oliver, and tonight we're stepping into the gloriously uncomfortable world of medieval life. You know, the one people on social media love to romanticize until they remember there's no toilet paper, no toothpaste, and no antibiotics. Just mud, superstition, and a 30% chance you'll die from a paper cut. Forget the shiny suits of armour and fairy tale castles you've seen in movies. Real medieval life was cold, filthy, and often smelled like a mixture of wet wool and rotting meat. Your bed, it's probably infested. Your diet, mostly porridge. Your healthcare plan, leech-based. I'd love to hear from you. So drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing who's choosing to spend their evening with our global community of history lovers. Now, please, settle into your most comfortable position, adjust your pillows, pull up that blanket, and feel the weight of the day begin to melt away. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1388. You open your eyes to the sound of church bells tolling in the distance, the smell of damp straw filling your nose, and the sharp realization that your entire village thinks bathing is suspicious. There's no going back to your cozy bed in the 21st century. No Wi-Fi, no coffee, and no exit. But let's see how you got yourself into this situation in the first place. Chapter 1. How you ended up here. It started like most regrettable adventures with the simple idea. Maybe you were scrolling through your phone one night, cozy under a blanket, watching one of those aesthetic medieval cottagecore videos. The ones with the crackling fireplaces, rustic bread loaves, and people living the simple life. No emails, no rent, just fresh air, hand-woven tunics, and long walks through misty fields. You probably thought to yourself, that doesn't sound so bad. I could survive that. Well, here you are, and it turns out you couldn't. Not really, because you've just woken up in the year 1388, the real medieval times, not the dinner theatre version, and not the romanticized fairy tale you've seen on streaming shows. No soft focus filter, no noble quests, no gentle harp music, just mud, cold air, and a constant sense of dread. Your first conscious thought is, why does everything smell like wet hay and old meat? The answer is simple, because that's what life smells like now. The floor of your house is dirt. The walls are made of sticks and mud. The roof is thatched, which means it's stuffed with dry straw. In theory, that's great insulation. In practice, it's a rat condominium. You can hear them scurrying above your head at night, nesting in the rafters, squeaking, scratching, doing rat things. You're no longer at the top of the food chain. Not in this house. Your bed is a sack of straw in the corner. It's not just scratchy, it's alive. Fleas, lice, maybe a spider or two. They're your roommates now. There's no mattress, no sheets, no memory foam. Just hay poking you in the ribs and the soft damp chill of medieval air against your face. You look around the room. There's not much to see. A single fire smoulders in the centre of the floor, its smoke curling lazily upward toward a hole in the roof. You sleep, cook and survive by that fire. You also smell like that fire, constantly. It gets in your hair, your clothes, your skin. After a while, you'll stop noticing, but the smoke stays with you. It seeps into everything. Next to the fire is a pot. Inside the pot is stew, or at least something stew adjacent. It's the same pot of food that's been bubbling for days, sometimes weeks. Ingredients come and go. One day it's mostly onions. The next day, barley. Occasionally someone throws in a bone. There's no recipe. It's just stew. You eat it until it runs out, Then you add more water and keep going. There's a bucket in the corner for waste. You try not to think about that. You sit up slowly. Your back aches. That's just part of waking up now. Medieval life is hard on the body, and it doesn't come with a chiropractor. Your hands are rough. Your nails are cracked. You're 30, but you feel 70. That's normal. Outside, you can hear the village waking up. Someone is chopping wood. Someone else is yelling at a pig. A baby cries. A rooster crows. The usual soundtrack of 14th century life. You're starting to realise this isn't a dream. There's no loading screen to take you back to the 21st century. No reset button. You're here now, and there's no way out. You step outside into the crisp morning air. The ground squishes beneath your feet. That's because the streets aren't paved, they're mud, and not just mud. This is the kind of mud that happens when you mix rainwater with human waste, animal waste, and every other disgusting thing people throw into the streets because there's nowhere else to put it. It seeps between your toes if you're barefoot. If you're lucky enough to have shoes, they're made of rough leather and offer about as much protection as a wet sock. You shiver. The wind cuts through your tunic. It's made of wool, thick and scratchy, and it always smells vaguely of sheep. You wear the same clothes every day because you only own one set. Laundry is rare. It's a seasonal event, not a weekly chore. When your clothes get too dirty, you just shake them out and hope for the best. Your stomach growls. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is usually yesterday's bread. It's coarse, dense, and sometimes full of little surprises like insects or mould. If you're lucky, you can dip it in leftover stew. If you're really lucky, there's ale to drink. Everyone drinks ale. Yes, even the children. Water is dangerous. It might look clear, but it's usually crawling with bacteria no one can see. Germ theory won't exist for another 500 years. So people drink small beer, weak ale, barely alcoholic, but safer than the well. After you eat, it's time to start your day. And your day is work, always work, from sunup to sundown, 6 days a week. Sundays are for church, but that's not exactly relaxing either. Church is mandatory. Skipping it is a crime. Most people work the land. You're probably one of them. Farming is back-breaking labour. You bend over for hours, planting seeds, pulling weeds, harvesting crops. Your tools are simple. Wooden ploughs, metal hoes if you're lucky. There's no fertiliser, unless you count manure, which, unfortunately, you do. Crops fail often. A bad harvest means hunger. A really bad harvest means starvation. If you don't work the land, you have other options, but they're not much better. Maybe you're a thatcher, patching roofs with straw and hoping you don't fall off. Maybe you're a tanner, scraping animal hides and soaking them in urine to make leather. The smell is permanent. People avoid you on the street, but at least you have a job. If you're a woman, your day is just as full. You grind grain, brew ale, sew clothes, clean everything, raise children, tend to animals, and cook. You don't get paid for any of it, but without you, the village falls apart. There's no such thing as rest. You work until your body protests, and then you work a little more. There's no such thing as early retirement in medieval times. You work until you die. As the day goes on, you try to stay out of trouble. Trouble is everywhere. Step on the wrong person's property. That's trespassing. Pick herbs from the Lord's forest. Poaching. Bake bread with the wrong kind of flour. Illegal. Gossip about the wrong person. That could get you punished too. You owe taxes on everything. If you grow food, you owe a portion to the local lord. If you catch fish, the lord gets a cut. If you sell something, you pay a fee. Even the church collects its share, usually about 10% of whatever you have left. which isn't much. By the time the sun starts to set, your body's heavy, your hands are stiff, your stomach is still half empty, but you're too tired to care. Dinner is another bowl of stew, maybe with some root vegetables if you're lucky. Meat is rare, it's expensive and hard to come by. If you eat meat, it's usually salted or dried, because there's no refrigeration. In the winter, you live on whatever you manage to store in the fall. In the spring, you hope the food doesn't run out before the next harvest comes in. As night falls, you gather by the fire. Someone tells a story, maybe about fairies or witches or ghosts in the woods. People here believe in magic. They believe in curses and demons. When the world feels random and cruel, superstition fills the gaps. You crawl back into your straw bed, wrap yourself in a scratchy blanket and close your eyes. You're sore, exhausted, and vaguely aware of the rats scratching in the thatch above your head. You'll get used to it. Your last thought before sleep is simple. You survived the day. Barely. But the laws are still out there, waiting for you tomorrow. Chapter 2. The laws are worse than the crimes. There's no police department in medieval times. No lawyers, no court-appointed defenders, no Miranda rights. The legal system is whatever the local lord says it is, and his mood usually decides the outcome. If someone accuses you of a crime, it doesn't really matter whether you're guilty or innocent. What matters is who you offended, how important they are, and how useful you are to the village. Justice isn't blind, it's just expensive. Punishments aren't designed to rehabilitate, they're designed to scare everyone else into behaving. If you steal bread, you might lose a hand. If you poach a deer from the Lord's forest, you could be hanged. If you insult someone important, you might find yourself locked in the stocks, your head and hands trapped while the whole village throws whatever they can find at your face. Rotten vegetables, rocks, sometimes worse. There's a system called trial by ordeal. It sounds exactly like what it is, a painful, humiliating test to determine your innocence. Maybe you'll have to carry a red-hot iron bar. If your wounds heal cleanly after 3 days, you're innocent. If they fester, you're guilty. Of course, the wounds always fester. No one knows about infection yet. Or they might tie rocks to your body and throw you into a river. If you sink, you're innocent. If you float, you're a witch. Either way, the odds aren't in your favour. The church handles a lot of legal cases, especially the ones they consider moral failures. Gossip, skipping church, drinking too much, blasphemy, all punishable by law. The church owns nearly a third of all the land in Europe, and they have courts of their own. They don't mess around. Most villages have something called a tithing group, 10 men who are responsible for each other's behaviour. If one of them commits a crime, the others are expected to turn him in. If they don't, they're all punished. It's designed to keep people obedient, but mostly it just makes everyone paranoid. Trust is rare here. Nobody wants to be the one caught looking the other way. Punishments are public events. People gather in the town square to watch. It's entertainment. Executions are especially popular. Parents bring their children. Merchants set up food stalls. There's no Netflix, so people watch the hangings instead. If you're accused of witchcraft, there's almost no way to prove your innocence. People believe witches cause disease, crop failure, and bad weather. Sometimes all it takes is a strange look or a neighbour's bad dream, and suddenly you're the village scapegoat. The best strategy is to keep your head down. Don't stand out, don't complain, don't ask questions. Survive quietly, if you can. As night falls again, you sit by the fire staring into the flames, thinking about all the ways this world can kill you. Disease, hunger, violence, the law. You wrap yourself in your blanket, close your eyes, and hope you make it through another day. Chapter 3. Your body versus medieval medicine. Your body isn't doing well. It's not just the cold or the hunger. It's the constant wear and tear of medieval life. You're sore, tired, and vaguely aware that something in your back probably gave up around midday. But you keep moving. Everyone does. Because stopping isn't really an option. In this world, nobody talks about wellness. There's no concept of self-care. No yoga mats, no multivitamins, no ergonomic chairs to protect your posture. There's work, sleep, and survival. That's it. When you get sick, the village healer steps in. Maybe it's the barber surgeon, who's technically your town's doctor, dentist, and part-time haircutter, all in one. Or maybe it's an old woman known for her herbal remedies. Her skills are passed down through whispered tradition. Plants for pain, roots for fever, salves for wounds. Some people trust her, others whisper that she's a witch. Either way, medicine in the 1300s is a gamble. People don't understand how the body works. The human skeleton is still a mystery. Blood moves through veins, but no one knows why. The heart, they think it's a furnace that heats your body. The brain, some believe it's just a sponge. When you get a fever, the first line of treatment is usually bloodletting. They slice a vein open to drain out what they think are bad humours. The humours are everything in medieval medicine. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, that's it. If you're sick, it's because these 4 fluids are out of balance. Why do you have too much phlegm? No one knows. But cutting you open seems like a reasonable solution. Sometimes they use leeches instead of knives. They collect the leeches from nearby rivers, store them in jars and slap them onto your skin. You lie still as the little creatures suck your blood, and the healer smiles, convinced this will help. If that doesn't work, and it usually doesn't, they move on to purging. That means making you vomit, or giving you something to, clear you out from the other end. They believe sickness comes from bad stuff inside you, and the fastest way to fix it is to get all that bad stuff out. None of this is comfortable, but comfort isn't part of the equation. If you have a wound, things get worse. There are no antiseptics, no antibiotics. A simple cut can get infected fast. Your skin turns red. Your muscles ache. You might develop a fever. In the best case scenario, someone rubs a mixture of herbs on it and prays. In the worst case scenario, they decide to amputate. Amputation is done with a saw. No anaesthesia, just a stick to bite down on, and maybe some strong ale to dull the edges of consciousness. They cut quickly, then burn the wound shut with a hot iron. The smell of cauterized flesh fills the room. Some people survive this, many don't. Dental care is just as terrifying. Teeth rot fast because there's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, and definitely no floss. When a tooth starts to hurt, the only solution is to pull it out. They use pliers or tongs, no numbing agents, no pain relief, just you sitting in a chair, gripping the arms until your knuckles turn white, while someone yanks. If the tooth breaks halfway through the job, they keep going. There's no oral surgeon to call. You get what you get. Childbirth is its own battlefield. Women give birth at home, usually with the help of midwives. There's no sterile equipment, no epidural, no prenatal vitamins. If the baby is in the wrong position, there's nothing anyone can do. Many women don't survive childbirth. Many babies don't either. It's just part of life. There's no word for trauma in this time period, no therapy. If something horrible happens, you shake it off and keep going. or you don't. Either way, the world moves forward. Disease is everywhere. You're constantly surrounded by invisible threats, though no one knows what a germ is yet. They blame bad air, called miasma. They think sickness floats on the wind, especially at night. That's why people cover their faces with cloth or burn herbs in their homes. It doesn't help, but it makes them feel like they're doing something. Plague is always lurking. Not the big famous one, that's a few decades earlier, but outbreaks still happen. People drop dead suddenly, their bodies covered in boils, their faces darkened by fever. The village buries them quickly, sometimes in mass graves because there's no time for individual funerals. Leprosy is another fear. It's not as common as people think, but when it shows up, it's terrifying. People with leprosy are forced to live outside the village. They wear special clothing and carry bells to warn others they're nearby. The isolation is brutal, but it's considered mercy. Leprosy is seen as both a disease and a punishment from God. Mental health, that's not even a category. If someone hears voices, they're either a prophet or possessed by demons. If they're lucky, they'll be treated as holy. If they're unlucky, they'll be locked away or worse. Doctors carry little pouches of herbs around their necks. They press them to their noses to protect themselves from bad air. When they treat patients, they mutter prayers and hope for divine intervention. Medicine is more religion than science, you might think. Surely the rich have it better. And yes, in some ways they do. They have softer beds, warmer clothes, more food. But when it comes to disease, even kings die from infected cuts. Even queens die in childbirth. Plague doesn't care about social class. Sickness is the great equalizer. Your body is constantly at risk. A stubbed toe can become an infection. A cold can turn into pneumonia. You don't have an immune system boost. You have an immune system gamble. There are no glasses if your vision starts to go. If you're nearsighted, you'll just squint at the world until you can't see anymore. There are no hearing aids, no corrective surgeries. If your joints ache, you live with it. If your back seizes up, you keep working. Sleep isn't exactly restful either. You sleep on straw, surrounded by family members, in a one-room hut. Privacy doesn't exist. If someone snores, you hear it. If someone rolls over, you feel it. If the fire goes out in the middle of the night, you wake up cold and shivering. There's no midnight snack waiting for you in the kitchen. No warm shower to soothe your muscles, just the flicker of the dying fire, the rustle of rats in the thatch above, and the slow realization that your body's breaking down, piece by piece, and you've only just begun. Chapter 4. Food, famine and hunger without end. You wake up hungry again. But that's normal. Hunger is part of the medieval experience, woven into daily life like wool into a tunic. There's never quite enough food, not for you, not for anyone. Most of the time, you eat grains. Bread is the staple, but it's not the soft, fluffy bread you're imagining. It's coarse and heavy, made with rye or barley. Sometimes there's ergot fungus in it, a toxic mould that grows on rye in damp conditions. Eating it can cause hallucinations, convulsions, and even death. But when you're starving, you eat what's available. If you live near a river, you might catch fish, but fishing rights usually belong to the local lord. Technically, casting a net without permission is poaching. If you get caught, the punishment could be severe, so you weigh your options carefully. Risk starving or risk getting arrested. Vegetables come from your garden, if you have one. Onions, leeks, turnips, cabbages. They grow slowly and they don't keep well. In the winter, You rely on pickled vegetables or dried ones. Fresh greens are rare during the cold months. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, isn't diagnosed yet, but it happens often. Your gums swell, your teeth loosen, and sores break out on your skin. Meat is a luxury. Pigs, chickens, and cows aren't just food. They're valuable property. Killing an animal for meat is a major decision. Usually, you only eat meat on holidays or special occasions. When you do, it's salted or smoked to make it last longer. Most of the time, your protein comes from dairy, cheese if you're lucky. But even cheese can be risky. Milk spoils quickly, and there's no refrigeration. You have to eat it before it goes bad. Butter is another option, but it's expensive to make, and even more expensive to keep. Sometimes you eat gruel. It's a thin porridge made of oats or barley, boiled in water. You might add a pinch of salt if you have any left. It's filling, but barely. You eat it slowly, hoping it will fool your stomach into thinking it's satisfied. In bad years, when the harvest fails, things get desperate. Famine isn't a distant nightmare. It's a regular visitor. Crops rot in the fields, rain floods the roads, grain stores run empty, prices soar, and even simple foods become too expensive to buy. People eat whatever they can find. Bark, grass, roots. They grind acorns into flour, even though it tastes bitter. Some dig up bones from old graves, boiling them for whatever scraps of marrow are left. It's not about nutrition, it's about survival. Starvation changes people. It makes neighbours suspicious of each other. It turns friends into competitors. Everyone is looking for something to eat, and no one has enough to share. In extreme cases, people eat things they never thought they would. The records don't lie. There are accounts of famines so severe that villagers turn to cannibalism. It's not common, but it happens. The human body has limits and hunger will push you past them. And yet, even when there's food, it's not always safe. Spoilage is a constant threat. Meat goes rancid, bread moulds, dairy sours. There's no FDA stamp, no expiration date, just a gamble with every bite. Most people are malnourished. Children have swollen bellies and thin limbs. Adults are stunted, smaller than their modern counterparts. Bones don't develop properly. Teeth fall out early. Life expectancy hovers around 30 or 40 years, not because people can't live longer, but because disease, injury, and hunger usually get them first. And still, you eat what you can. You sip weak ale instead of water, because at least the brewing process kills some of the germs. You stretch every meal as far as it will go, knowing there's no guarantee of another. Food isn't pleasure here. It's not something to savour or celebrate. It's a daily negotiation with the universe. And the universe, most of the time, says no. As you drift into sleep, stomach half full at best, you realise the truth about this world. It's not just dangerous because of violence or plague. It's dangerous because the simplest things, eating, drinking, staying warm, are now life or death events, and there's no escape. Not yet. Chapter 5. Nightfall and the fear of the dark. The day is over, but that doesn't mean you're safe. Night in medieval times is a different world entirely. When the sun sets, the rules change. The streets, if you can call them that, disappear into darkness. There are no street lights, no cosy porch lamps, no glow from phone screens. Night is black, utterly black. The only light comes from the moon, if it's visible, or from the small flickering flames of oil lamps and candles. But candles are expensive. Most people can't afford to waste them. Firewood is precious too, so when darkness falls, it falls completely. People go to bed early, not because they're well rested, but because there's nothing else to do. Reading is a luxury. Most people can't read and books are rare. So you sit in the dim glow of the fire, staring at the embers, letting your mind wander into strange quiet places, but sleep doesn't come easily, because the night is full of threats. The first is simple. Other people. Bandits don't just lurk on lonely roads. They sometimes come straight into villages, especially if they think you have something worth stealing. Your home isn't exactly secure. There's no lock on the door, just a wooden latch or maybe a bar across the entrance, if you're lucky enough to have one. If someone wants to break in, they will. There's not much you can do about it. And then there's the wildlife. Wolves still roam the countryside, so do bears in some regions. If you're near the forest, you might hear the howls echo through the trees at night. Livestock disappears sometimes, dragged away in the dark. And if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you could disappear too. But what people fear most isn't animals or thieves. It's the unseen things. This is a world ruled by superstition. The darkness is alive with spirits. Ghosts of the dead wander the roads. Witches ride through the skies. Demons crawl into your home if you leave the door open too long. People believe these things not because they're foolish, but because it explains the unexplainable. Why did a healthy child die suddenly? Why did the crops fail? Why did the fever come? It must be something in the dark. That's why you keep religious icons near the door. Maybe there's a small wooden cross hanging by the threshold, or a charm woven from herbs over the window. You whisper prayers before you sleep. You murmur protection spells passed down from parents and grandparents, half-remembered words meant to keep evil away. It doesn't matter if they work, it matters that you say them. You lay down on your straw bed again, pulling the rough blanket over your shoulders. The fire crackles low, shadows dance on the walls, and you tell yourself, they're just shadows, nothing more. But part of you isn't sure. Sleep comes in waves, you drift in and out of it. Medieval nights are broken into segments. Most people don't sleep straight through. There's first sleep, then a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night, and then second sleep. During that quiet waking period, people pray, think, talk quietly, or just stare into the darkness. Your ears stay alert. Every creak of the wooden walls, every rustle of wind, every distant animal sound triggers a tiny spike of anxiety. You try to relax, but your body is tuned for survival now. Even in sleep, you're on edge. Some nights, the church bells ring after midnight, not for time, but for warning. Sometimes it's to signal a death. Sometimes it's because someone saw a light in the woods, believed to be a will-o'-the-wisp or a wandering spirit. And sometimes it's just superstition. The villagers spooking each other into paranoia because fear is easier to share than silence. If you're caught outside after curfew, you're in trouble. The night watch patrols the village, armed with lanterns and cudgels. They assume anyone out at night is a thief or worse. If they find you wandering, there's no polite conversation. You're dragged away and questioned, maybe beaten, maybe fined, maybe worse, depending on their mood. So you stay where you are, breathing slowly, staring at the ceiling of your home. A patchwork of wooden beams, thatch and shadows. Your family breathes beside you. Someone coughs, someone rolls over. Life continues quietly, cautiously, waiting for the first hint of dawn, because dawn means survival. Another night behind you, another day ahead, and that's all you can really hope for. Chapter 6. Religion, Superstition, and the Weight of the Soul. You wake to the sound of church bells. Again, They're not just marking time, they're reminding you who's in charge. The church controls everything in this world. It owns land, dictates laws, and oversees the rhythm of life from birth to death. From the moment you're born, your life is tied to religion. You're baptized within days because dying unbaptized is considered a terrible fate. An unbaptized soul doesn't go to heaven, it's believed to hover in limbo, forever lost. Every week you attend Mass. It's not optional. Skipping church can lead to fines, punishment, or worse, accusations of heresy. And in this world, heresy is more dangerous than theft. More dangerous than murder sometimes. Heresy threatens the order of things, and order is everything. You don't understand Latin, but that doesn't matter. The priest speaks it anyway. You stand, kneel, stand again, murmur prayers you half remember, and try to stay awake. The church building is cold, damp, and smells faintly of old incense and stone. Candles flicker. Statues of saints stare down from shadowed corners, their painted eyes faded by time. The priest talks about sin, always sin, everything is sin. Working on Sundays, sin. Speaking badly of someone, sin. Eating too much, sin. Not eating enough, also sin. Life is a delicate balance between doing too much and not enough, and the punishment for getting it wrong is eternal. Hell isn't a vague concept here. It's very real, very specific, and described in detail. People believe in flames, in demons, in endless suffering. They've seen paintings of it on the church walls. They've heard sermons that paint the scenes in their minds. Hell is not just fear. It's a place you can imagine clearly, with sounds, smells, and agonies too detailed to forget. There's no comfort in death. People are as terrified of the afterlife as they are of life itself. But the church offers one thing, a chance at salvation, a narrow chance, but a chance nonetheless. Confess your sins, say the right prayers, donate to the church if you can. Maybe buy an indulgence, a piece of paper sold by church officials promising time off from purgatory. It costs money, of course, everything does. The rich get more forgiveness, the poor get lectures. Still you try. You say your prayers at night. You cross yourself when you pass the graveyard. You avoid the places where spirits are said to gather, and there are many of those places. People believe in ghosts. Everyone does. The dead are restless, especially if they weren't buried properly or died suddenly. Suicide victims aren't buried in churchyards. They're placed at crossroads or in unmarked graves, so their spirits won't find their way back home. Witches are everywhere, or at least that's what people think. An old woman who talks to herself, probably a witch. A healer who knows too many herbs, suspicious. A neighbour whose cow died mysteriously, clearly cursed by someone. You might even believe in fairies. Not the cute kind with wings and sparkles. The dangerous kind that steal children, sour milk, and lead travellers astray in the woods. People leave offerings to keep them happy. A bowl of milk left on the doorstep. A charm hung over the door. No one says it out loud, but everyone plays along. Superstition fills the gaps where science hasn't arrived yet. No one knows why diseases spread or why the weather changes suddenly, so they invent reasons. Bad omens, curses, the wrath of God. The mischief of spirits, it's all part of the same fragile logic. Astrology guides decisions. People consult star charts to decide when to plant crops, when to marry, when to travel. If the stars aren't favourable, they wait. If the moon is in the wrong phase, they don't leave the village. The sky's as much a rule book as the Bible. And then there's death. Death is everywhere. You see it daily, in the streets, in the fields, in your own home. Life expectancy is short. You go to bed each night, knowing that someone you know might wake up tomorrow, or maybe it will be you. Burial is a ritual. The church decides who gets a proper burial and who doesn't. Graveyards surround churches, but they're not peaceful gardens. They're crowded, shallow, sometimes reused. Bones poke up from the earth after heavy rains. Skulls resurface. It's not unusual. It's just life, or rather, life's ending. People talk about memento mori, remembering death. It's not just a phrase, it's a practice. Skulls carved into door frames, paintings of skeletons dancing with the living, reminders everywhere that death is coming, and you'd better be ready. You try to be. You do what you're told. You live by the rules. You pray, you confess, you tithe, but deep down, you know it's a gamble. No one is really sure what happens next. The church tells you stories. The village shares ghost tales. Your dreams swirl with images of flames, spirits, angels and darkness. And so you keep going, caught between fear of death and fear of life, trying to survive long enough to make it to tomorrow. If there is a tomorrow. Chapter 7. War is coming. Whether you want it or not, the air feels heavier than usual today. It starts with whispers. The village is buzzing, quietly, nervously, because someone passed through on horseback last night. A messenger from the local lord. His face was pale. His clothes were muddy. He rode fast, barely stopping to speak to anyone. But everyone knows what that means. War. Not a distant war in some far-off land, not the kind you read about in stories or hear sung in taverns. No, this one is coming here, to your region, maybe even to your village. You don't have a say in it. Wars just happen. Kings get angry, lords get greedy, borders shift. Old grudges resurface. A nobleman insults another nobleman, and suddenly thousands of people are called to fight, even though they had nothing to do with the argument. If you're a man between the ages of 16 and 60, you're eligible for conscription. That means you can be forced to fight whether you're ready or not, whether you want to or not. The local lord will send for you soon. You'll gather in the village square with the other men. Listen to the steward read out a list of names, and wait to see if yours is called. There's no training, no boot camp. If you're lucky, you might get a spear. If you're unlucky, you'll show up with a pitchfork or a wooden club. Armour, not for you. That's reserved for knights and nobles. You'll fight in your regular clothes. Maybe with a metal helmet if the village blacksmith has time to hammer one out. Most of the battle will be waiting, standing in the mud, clutching your weapon, staring across a field at men just like you, also cold, also scared, also wondering why they're there. When the fighting starts, it's chaos. There's no strategy for people like you, no careful military plans. Just a wall of bodies crashing into another wall of bodies, screaming, stabbing, swinging wildly. You won't hear heroic music swelling in the background. You'll hear metal on bone, teeth breaking, breath wheezing out of punctured lungs. If you fall, no one will stop to help you. Most medieval battles are over. In an hour or two, the losing side runs and the winners chase them down. That's when the real bloodshed happens. Not during the battle, but after. Soldiers kill the fleeing enemy as sport. It's easier than fighting them head-on. You don't want to be on the wrong end of that chase. If you survive the battle, congratulations. You've still got the aftermath to deal with. There's no clean-up crew. The battlefield is left exactly as it is. Corpses rotting in the sun. Horses lying in unnatural positions, discarded weapons sticking out of the mud. Sometimes villagers are forced to help bury the dead. Sometimes they're too afraid to go near the bodies. And then there's the looting. Victorious soldiers steal whatever they can find. Coins, clothes, shoes, teeth if they're desperate enough. Some cut off fingers to get rings. Some take boots right off the dead, even if they're soaked in blood. If an army passes through your village, things get worse. They'll eat your food, sleep in your home, take your animals, and leave you with nothing. Even friendly armies do this. It's called foraging, but it's just legalized robbery. If the soldiers aren't friendly, well, that's when the fires start. You've heard the stories. Whole villages burned to the ground because someone resisted. People dragged from their homes, accused of hiding supplies, punished just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Women and children aren't safe either. War doesn't have rules here. Not for ordinary people. Sieges are even worse. If you live near a castle or fortified town, you might get stuck inside while an army surrounds you. No food comes in. Disease spreads fast, water runs out. People start eating rats, leather, even dirt. Some cut pieces of flesh from corpses to stay alive. And if the walls fall, the soldiers don't just walk in politely. They storm the place, swords drawn, eyes wild. It's called a sack, and it's as bad as it sounds. Looting, burning, killing. Sometimes for days, sometimes for fun. But here's the strange part. Despite all this, war is also a kind of entertainment for the upper class. For knights and nobles, battle is a chance to prove their honour, to win glory, to show off their skills. They wear expensive armour, ride trained horses, and fight in tournaments to practice for real war. For them, it's almost a sport. For you, it's a death sentence. If you're captured, you're not worth a ransom. Nobles get taken prisoner and traded for gold. You get left to rot, and if you do somehow survive battle after battle, you'll probably come home with scars, both on your body and in your mind. There's no word for trauma here, no therapy, no one asks if you're okay. You just come back, try to pick up where you left off, and hope the nightmares eventually fade. They usually don't. Chapter 8. Love, Marriage, and Other Medieval Nightmares. Love doesn't work the way you think it does in medieval times. Forget the romantic stories about knights rescuing princesses or star-crossed lovers meeting in secret gardens. Real medieval love is usually about one thing: survival. Marriage isn't about feelings, it's about property, alliances, and keeping families afloat. You marry because you have to, not because you fell in love over candlelit dinners and long walks by the river. Those don't exist. If you're a peasant, like most people, marriage is arranged by your parents or your village. Sometimes the lord of the land gets involved too, especially if he wants to control who marries whom. It's all about keeping labour organised. Who will run the farm? Who will have children to help? Who will owe taxes to whom? That's how you end up married at 15 or 16, sometimes earlier. There's no waiting until you're ready. Readiness isn't part of the conversation. You get married when the village decides you're old enough, which usually means you've survived childhood without dying of disease. That's the bar. Your wedding is simple. No big celebration unless you're wealthy, which you're not. You might have a feast, but it's probably just extra bread, and maybe a little bit of meat if the neighbours chip in. The priest blesses the union. There's some wine if you're lucky, and then you go back to work. Marriage doesn't mean time off. It just means you're legally allowed to share a bed and start making children. Speaking of which, children are part of the deal whether you want them or not. There's no birth control, except for a few risky herbal remedies whispered about in secret. Most of those don't work. Some are dangerous. So you have as many children As your body allows, many of them won't survive. That's just the reality. Child mortality is high. Babies die in infancy from diseases no one can name. Toddlers catch fevers and never recover. If you have 8 children, you might be lucky to see 4 of them reach adulthood. It's not that people don't love their kids. They do, but they love with caution, knowing the odds. Marriage roles are strict. If you're a woman, your life is household labour from dawn to dusk. Cooking, sewing, cleaning, child rearing, and managing animals. If you're a man, you work the fields or your trade, but you're still part of the household grind. Everyone works. There's no concept of stay at home anything. Home is where you survive, not where you rest. Marriage laws are equally harsh. Divorce isn't really an option. The church forbids it. In rare cases, marriages can be annulled, but only if you have powerful connections or extreme circumstances, like being related too closely by blood. For everyone else, marriage is permanent, whether it works or not. Infidelity is punished, sometimes by public shaming, sometimes by physical punishment. If a woman is caught cheating, the consequences are usually worse than for a man. Double standards exist here too. Of course they do. Love itself, it happens quietly. Sometimes couples grow fond of each other over time, sometimes they don't. Some marriages are partnerships, others are miserable. People stay together because they have no other choice. And if you don't marry, well, that's suspicious. Spinsters and bachelors are viewed with curiosity at best, suspicion at worst. People assume you're odd, unlucky, or hiding something. Romantic love, as you understand it, is mostly for poetry. Troubadours sing about it in castles. Nobles write letters full of longing and flowery language, but those are games for the rich. For you, love is practical. Love is who shares your burdens, who helps with the harvest, who watches the children when you're sick, who dies beside you when the next plague comes. That's romance here, as you lie back down on your straw mattress tonight, listening to the soft breaths of your spouse, or perhaps the silence of their absence. You realise medieval love is like everything else in this time. Not simple, not fair, and definitely not optional. You close your eyes listening to the sounds of the village in the dark and prepare for another day in a world where nothing is guaranteed, not even love. Chapter 9. Crime, Punishment and Public Humiliation. You don't have to do much to get punished in medieval times. In fact, you don't have to do anything wrong at all. Sometimes bad luck is enough. But when someone accuses you of a crime, whether it's stealing a chicken, insulting your neighbour, or breaking a law you didn't even know existed, you're dragged into the justice system. And it's not exactly fair. First of all, there's no police force. There's the local lordsmen, maybe a constable, and sometimes a night watch. But no trained detectives, no lawyers, no Miranda rights. Justice is more about keeping order than finding the truth. If someone says you did something wrong, the village gathers to decide your fate. It's not like court today. There's no jury box, no judge in a robe, just people standing around whispering, pointing fingers, nodding grimly. Evidence? That's optional. Sometimes they use trial by ordeal to figure out if you're guilty. You've probably heard of this, but living through it is another matter entirely. Trial by ordeal is exactly what it sounds like. They put you through something painful and see if God protects you. One method is the ordeal of hot iron. They heat a metal rod until it's red, then make you carry it a few steps. Afterward, they bandage your burns. If the wounds heal cleanly, you're innocent. If they fester, you're guilty. Of course, burns almost always get infected in this era, so you can guess how that usually turns out. There's also the ordeal of water. They tie your hands and feet and toss you into a river. If you sink, you're innocent. If you float, you're guilty, because floating is seen as a sign of rejecting baptism. It means the water is pushing you away. Like a cursed object, most people hope for a more mundane punishment. Fines are common. So is public humiliation. The stocks are probably the most familiar. You're locked into a wooden frame, your head and hands sticking through holes, so everyone can see you. You might stay there for hours, sometimes days. People walk by and spit at you. Some throw rotten food. Children poke sticks at you just to see what happens. There's also the pillory, which is similar, but leaves you standing upright. Either way, it's not just about punishment. It's about making an example of you. The idea is to scare everyone else into behaving. For bigger crimes, things get darker. Whipping is common. They strip you to the waist and lash you with a knotted cord or leather strap. It's not ceremonial. It's meant to hurt. Sometimes your back gets infected afterward. Sometimes you faint. No one stops to check if you're okay. Mutilation is another favourite. Cut off a hand for theft. Lose an ear for lying. Brand someone's face with hot iron so the whole village knows what they did. The scars tell a story, and everyone reads them. If the crime is bad enough, or if the village is in the mood for a spectacle, you might face execution. But not the quick, clean kind. Hanging is the standard method. You're led to the gallows, a simple wooden frame with a rope. There's no trapdoor, no careful calculations to break your neck. They just pull the rope tight and let you dangle, kicking, gasping, slowly choking until you stop moving. Sometimes they get creative. If you're accused of heresy or witchcraft, burning at the stake is the preferred method. It's not just about death, it's about sending a message. Fire purifies, they say. So they build a pile of wood, tie you to a post and light the flames. And if you're really unlucky, you might get drawn and quartered. That's reserved for traitors. First, they hang you briefly, then cut you down while you're still alive. They open your body, pull out your intestines, set them on fire while you watch, then cut off your head. Your body is divided into 4 parts and displayed in different towns to warn others. Of course, you tell yourself you won't get into trouble. You'll keep your head down, follow the rules. But rules shift like the wind in this time period. One day something is legal. The next day it's a crime. If the Lord needs to make an example of someone, you might be chosen at random. And there's no appeal process, no second chances, so you walk carefully, you speak softly, you keep your secrets to yourself. Because here, justice isn't about right and wrong, it's about power and survival. Chapter 10. Nobles, Peasants and the Walls Between Worlds. Life in the medieval world is divided, sharply, absolutely, by class. At the bottom, there's you, a peasant, a labourer, a nobody. At the top there's the nobility, the lords, ladies, knights, barons, dukes and kings. They live in castles, they wear silk, they eat meat every day, not just on feast days. They drink wine imported from faraway places while you sip weak ale because the water in your village could kill you. But here's the thing. Nobles aren't better off in every way. Their lives are dangerous too, just in different ways. Castles are cold, draughty and filled with disease. Rats run through the kitchens. The stone walls are damp. Nobles sleep on raised beds with feather mattresses, but they still wake up freezing. Their clothes are fine, but they're heavy, layered and complicated to put on. Dressing a noble takes servants, sometimes several. Their food is extravagant, but not exactly healthy. Rich stews, fatty meats and sweets loaded with honey or sugar for those lucky enough to import it. Nobles suffer from gout, tooth decay and digestion problems from overeating, but they don't know that's why they're sick. They think it's just part of being alive. Still, they live longer than peasants, mostly because they're insulated from the hardest labour. A lord doesn't plough fields, a lady doesn't haul buckets of water from the well. Their wealth buys a buffer from some of life's brutality, but not all of it. Politics among the noble class are vicious. Alliances shift. Betrayals happen in whispered conversations behind closed doors. A single wrong word can cost you your title, your lands, or your head. Court life is a chess game, and the stakes are always fatal. Knights train from childhood to fight for the nobility. They don't just ride into battle, they also serve as enforcers. They collect taxes, suppress rebellions, and keep the lower classes in check. Some knights are honourable, some are cruel. Either way, they're the armoured hand of the noble class. But for peasants, the noble world feels impossibly far away. You don't enter the castle unless you're summoned. Maybe to pay taxes, maybe to deliver goods, maybe because you're in trouble. Either way, you keep your eyes low, speak when spoken to, and leave as quickly as possible. Nobles own the land, you work it, they collect your grain as tax, they control the mills where you grind your wheat, and the ovens where you bake your bread. They even control the forests. If you hunt there without permission, it's poaching. The punishment? Death sometimes. Or at least a heavy fine you can't afford. You belong to the land in a way that's hard to imagine today. You're part of the estate, like the fields, the livestock, or the barns. You can't move to a different village without permission. If the lord sells the land, you go with it. Sometimes, if you're a serf, you're technically free, but only technically. You owe labour in exchange for protection. You plough the lord's fields before your own. You repair his roads. You build his walls. You have very little say in the matter. And yet, peasants aren't powerless, not completely. There are revolts, small ones mostly, quiet acts of defiance, villagers hiding grain to avoid taxes, poachers sneaking into the woods under moonlight, gossip spreading through marketplaces, tiny rebellions that help people survive. Sometimes larger revolts happen, angry mobs with pitchforks and torches, but those usually end badly. Knights are called in, heads roll, villages burn. The old order reasserts itself harder than before, so most people keep their heads down and endure. You might see a noble ride past on a fine horse, cloaked in velvet, sword at his side, banners fluttering behind him. He doesn't notice you. To him, you're part of the scenery, a figure in the field, a name on a tax ledger, nothing more. And yet when sickness comes or famine hits or war crashes through the countryside, you both suffer, just differently. The walls between your worlds aren't as solid as they seem. Still, you spend most of your life looking up at those walls, wondering what's behind them, knowing you'll never get inside. And that's just the way it is. Chapter 11. The Black Death arrives. And so do the flies. You might think things can't get worse, but they can. And in the medieval world, they do. It starts with a rumour. A merchant passing through whispers that a strange sickness is spreading from the east. Nobody knows exactly where it began. Maybe somewhere beyond Constantinople, or maybe on one of those silk-laden ships that docked in Sicily. The stories change depending on who's telling them. At first you don't believe it. Sickness is normal here. People are always dying from something. Fevers, rashes, stomach pains. Death is part of the scenery, like mud or smoke from chimneys. But this is different. They say people die fast, too fast. One day, they're fine. And the next, they're coughing up blood, covered in dark, oozing swellings, the size of apples. Buboes, they're called. The skin turns black. The body rots while the person is still breathing, and then they stop breathing, usually within 2 or 3 days, sometimes less. Nobody knows why it's happening. Some say it's a punishment from God, others blame the air. The miasma theory is popular, that bad smells carry death, so people walk around with bundles of herbs stuffed up their noses, or little bags of flowers tied around their necks. Some burn incense in the streets. It doesn't help, but at least the smell is nicer. When the plague finally reaches your village, it comes silently. You don't see it at first, you hear it. Someone coughs, a neighbour's child starts shivering uncontrollably, a man collapses in the field, face slick with sweat, lips turning blue. The church bells start ringing more often. Not for prayer, this time for death. At first, the village tries to carry on. People bury the bodies quickly, sometimes before the person is fully cold. The graveyard fills up fast. When there's no room left, new pits are dug at the edge of town, mass graves. You've heard of them, but now you're standing next to one, staring at the dirt. Nobody wants to touch the bodies, but someone has to. Grave diggers wear long robes. Some cover their faces with cloth soaked in vinegar. Others use bird-like masks with long beaks stuffed with herbs. The masks don't help. The plague still comes. You try not to panic. You stay inside, bar the door, and hope it passes you by. But the rats don't care about doors. Neither do the fleas. You don't know it yet, but that's how the disease spreads. Fleas bite infected rats, then bite you. It's not a punishment from God. It's biology, but that's not much comfort. When you get sick, you know right away. It starts with a headache, then a fever that burns from the inside out. Your lymph nodes swell until you can't move your neck. Your groin and armpits feel like they're packed with rocks. The buboes rise under your skin, hard black lumps that stink when they break open. And then comes the worst part, the smell of death. It's not poetic, it's not symbolic, it's literal. The body starts to rot before life has left it. Your sweat smells sour, your breath turns foul. People around you recoil, not just because they're afraid of catching it, but because you reek of decay while you're still conscious. Doctors, they don't help. There's no cure. Some bleed their patients, hoping to release the sickness. Others apply poultices of onions, garlic, or crushed emeralds. Some recommend bathing in urine. Some recommend avoiding baths altogether. Advice is inconsistent, and none of it works. Priests come to hear confessions, but many refuse to get close. Even the holy men are terrified. Neighbours stop visiting each other. Friends abandon friends. Families lock their doors, leaving sick relatives inside to die alone. Entire households vanish within a week, one by one, coughing, crying, falling silent. Cats and dogs disappear too, sometimes killed in panic, because people think they're spreading the disease. They're not wrong about the rats, but nobody figures that part out for years. If you survive, you're lucky, but you're also traumatized. You might walk outside one day to find the village eerily quiet. No smoke from chimneys, no chatter in the streets, just bodies slumped in doorways or sprawled in the grass, sometimes half buried, sometimes not buried at all. The fields go untended, crops rot where they stand, animals wander freely, cows, pigs, goats, because the people who fed them are gone. There's no one left to shoo them away. At night, you hear strange sounds, wolves coming closer than usual, sniffing around the edges of the village, birds that don't normally visit picking at corpses, flies buzzing endlessly. They coat everything, skin, clothes, eyes. Death hums in the air, like background music. Some people turn to religion, others abandon it completely. Why would God do this? Why would he allow this? Some say it's a test, others say it's proof that the end of the world is coming. Flagellants roam from town to town, groups of men and women who whip themselves in public, hoping that by punishing their own flesh, they'll convince God to stop the plague. They sing hymns between strikes of the whip, backs bleeding, tears running down their faces. It doesn't work. The plague continues. Others turn to scapegoats. Jews are blamed in many places, accused of poisoning wells, of summoning demons. Pogroms break out. People are dragged from their homes and burned. It's cruel, senseless, and very, very human. There's no way to track the numbers. No official death toll, but by the time it's over, about a third of Europe is gone. In some places, it's half. Imagine flipping a coin for every person you know. Heads, they live. Tails, they don't. That's what it feels like. And after it ends, if it ever really ends, you're left with a new problem. Rebuilding. Fields need ploughing, walls need fixing, life has to continue. But there are fewer people to do the work. Wages rise for those who survive, because labour is suddenly valuable. Some peasants move to cities, seeking better lives. Some try to start over in other villages, but the scars remain, and the fear stays too. For the rest of your life, you'll remember the smell of the plague. You'll remember the sound of coughing in the dark. You'll remember the silence of empty streets. You'll carry it with you, like a shadow, even on bright days, because when you've lived through the Black Death, the world never feels clean again. Chapter 12. Leaving the village, travel, danger, and the fear of the road. In the modern world, people travel for fun. A weekend trip to the coast, a visit to a friend across the country, a spontaneous decision to go somewhere new, just because you feel like it. But in the medieval world, travel isn't a hobby. It's a risk, a gamble, a last resort. Most people never leave their village, not because they don't want to see the world, but because the world is dangerous, and the farther you wander from home, the more likely you are to vanish entirely. Still, sometimes you don't have a choice. Maybe your crops failed this year. Maybe the Lord raised taxes again, and you're out of options. Maybe you're a younger child in a large family, and there's simply not enough land to go around. So you pick up what little you own, probably just the clothes on your back, and you set out on the road. It starts out quietly enough. You walk away from your village before dawn, before the sky turns fully blue, before the rooster crows. You glance back once, but you don't linger. There's nothing to linger for. The village will continue without you, or it won't. Either way, you won't be there to see it. The road is just a dirt path, winding between hedges and trees, sometimes narrowing until you're not sure if it's still a road at all. There are no signposts, no maps in your pocket, no GPS voice telling you where to turn. You rely on word of mouth. Directions from travellers you meet along the way. If you're lucky, someone points you toward the next town. If you're unlucky, they send you the wrong way on purpose because strangers can't always be trusted. The first thing you notice is how empty the world feels. Between villages, there's just open land, forests, fields, rivers that don't have bridges. You walk for hours without seeing another soul. Sometimes you hear something moving in the trees. An animal, probably. but maybe not. Bandits hide in the woods, waiting for travellers like you. They're not the romantic outlaws from stories. They're desperate men with knives and clubs, and they'll take everything you have, even if everything is barely worth the trouble. Some might let you live, some won't. You keep moving anyway, because stopping isn't safe either. At night, you sleep where you can, sometimes in a field, sometimes under a tree. There are no inns for people like you. If you find a monastery, you might be able to beg for shelter. Monks sometimes take pity on travellers, but they might turn you away too. Resources are scarce. Sleeping outside is its own kind of danger. Wolves are real. So are bears in some regions. Wild boars can gore a man to death, but animals aren't your biggest fear. It's other people. Robbers, murderers. Soldiers who have gone rogue, wandering the countryside between wars, taking what they want. And then there's the weather. It rains hard, and when it does, the road turns to sludge. Your shoes, if you have them, soak through. Your feet blister. Your clothes stay wet for days, clinging to your skin, heavy with mud. There's no changing into dry pyjamas, no curling up by a warm fire. You keep walking, teeth chattering, shivering under your cloak or hood, hoping you don't catch a fever. In the summer, it's different, but just as brutal. The sun beats down, baking your skin. There's no sunscreen here, no bottled water. You drink from streams when you find them, and hope the water isn't tainted. Sometimes it is. Diarrhea isn't just unpleasant in this world, it's life-threatening. You might come across other travellers on the road, pilgrims, merchants, wandering monks, beggars. Some greet you kindly, some don't. You learn quickly not to trust everyone you meet. And then there are the tolls. Local lords control the roads. They set up checkpoints, called toll stations, where you're forced to pay for the privilege of walking on land they've claimed as their own. If you don't have money, you offer labour or food, or you move off the road entirely and cut through the forest, hoping to avoid them. But the forest has its own problems. Getting lost is easy. Paths split and merge without warning. Landmarks look the same. Trees, moss-covered stones, little streams curling through the underbrush. If you lose your way, there's no rescue coming. No helicopter search teams, no phone call for help. Some people are never seen again. They disappear into the woods, into the hills, into the quiet spaces between villages, and no one knows what happened to them. And yet, for all this, people still travel. Merchants move from town to town, selling salt, cloth, spices if they're lucky. Pilgrims walk for months, sometimes years, trying to reach holy sites, hoping for miracles, hoping to buy forgiveness with blisters and bruises. Soldiers march between wars, messengers ride between castles, carrying letters sealed with wax and ribbons, and wanderers like you keep going because sometimes staying put isn't an option. Eventually, if you survive long enough, you reach a new village. You stand at the edge of it, unsure of how you'll be received. You're an outsider. People are wary of outsiders. Strangers bring disease or rumours or bad luck. You might be allowed to stay if the village needs labour, or you might be turned away. If you do find work, it starts all over again. Fields to plough, animals to tend, grain to harvest. The faces are different, but the rhythm is the same, and yet something inside you has changed. You've seen what's beyond your village walls. You've walked the dangerous roads, slept under strange skies, listened to the sounds of an unfamiliar world humming just out of sight. Most people will never know what that feels like. They'll never leave their birthplace. They'll live and die in the same square mile of earth. But you've seen the world beyond the hedgerows. You've tasted its danger, felt its cold breath on your neck, and if you're very lucky, you'll live to tell the story. Chapter 13. Hunger, your most loyal companion. You wake up hungry, not the kind of hunger you might feel today after skipping lunch. Not the type that makes you say, "I'm starving," before opening the fridge. This is medieval hunger, a gnawing, bone-deep emptiness, the kind that lives with you, sleeps beside you, wakes you in the middle of the night with cramps in your stomach and a thin, sour taste in your throat. In this world, hunger isn't a temporary problem. It's a life condition. You're never quite full, you're never quite satisfied, and you're never sure when the next real meal is coming. Most days begin the same way, with pottage. Pottage is a watery stew of whatever you can find. A handful of barley, some beans if you're lucky. Cabbage, onions, leeks, root vegetables that store well and don't rot too quickly. You might throw in bits of stale bread to thicken it up. Sometimes you boil the same pot for days, adding water when it gets low. The flavour changes depending on what's floating in it. Usually it tastes like nothing, but it fills the gap. Meat, that's rare. You don't hunt game because the forests belong to the nobility. Poaching can get you killed. Sometimes, though, you find a rabbit or a squirrel that the Lord's men won't miss. You cook it quietly, in secret, and hope no one sees the smoke from your chimney. Most of the time, you eat bread, but not the soft, fluffy kind. Medieval bread is hard, coarse, made with rye or barley if you're poor, sometimes mixed with ground-up peas or beans to stretch the flour further. In bad years, bakers mix in sawdust or chalk. You pretend not to notice the grit between your teeth. Wheat bread is for the rich. You've heard stories about it. White, light, sweet-smelling, but you've never tasted it, not once. There's cheese sometimes, and ale, weak, watery ale that you drink because the water in the well might make you sick. Fermentation kills some of the disease, so ale is safer. Children drink it too. Babies even. Nobody questions that. If you're lucky enough to live near the sea, you might eat fish. If you don't, you might still get fish, but it's probably dried, salted, and shipped from far away. It tastes like salt and little else. Salt is precious here, expensive, sometimes worth more than gold in certain places. And then there are the fast days. The church controls the calendar, and that means nearly half the year is made up of days when you're not allowed to eat meat. Not that you had much to begin with, but on fast days it's officially forbidden. Fish is allowed, but again, that depends on where you live. People get creative. They classify certain animals as fish just to get around the rules. Beavers, for example. Monks declare beaver tails to be fish, so they can fry them during Lent, puffins too in some regions. Because when you're starving, theology becomes flexible. Then there are the famine years. They happen more often than you'd like to admit. A few weeks of too much rain can destroy the crops. A cold snap in spring kills the seedlings. A summer drought withers the grain, and suddenly the whole village is in trouble. When there's no harvest, there's no bread, no grain to pay as tax, no seed to plant for next year. People eat whatever they can find. Bark peeled from trees, roots dug from the hard ground. Nettles, weeds, grass. Some boil leather from old shoes just to chew on something. Parents go without food so their children can eat. Sometimes the children go without food so the parents can stay strong enough to work. The weak die first, the elderly, the infants, the sick. But sometimes the healthy go too because starvation doesn't care about fairness. There are stories of cannibalism in the worst years. Nobody talks about it openly, but the rumours exist. In the darkest corners of famine, people do things they never imagined they would, and yet life goes on. You get up in the morning, stomach growling, and do what needs to be done. You work the fields, you patch your roof, you repair your tools. Hunger becomes background noise, like the sound of the wind in the trees or the creak of your neighbour's cartwheels. Festivals help when they come. On feast days, the whole village gathers, and for a few brief hours the tables are covered with food. Bread, cheese, maybe a roasted pig, if someone in the village is wealthy enough to sponsor it. You eat until your belly aches, knowing it won't happen again for months. You savour those moments. You remember them during the lean seasons, when your fingers tremble from lack of food, and you can't concentrate because your body is busy trying not to collapse. Over time, you learn to live with it. You don't ask to be full. You ask to be fed enough to work, enough to get through the day, enough to wake up tomorrow and do it all again. That's medieval survival. It's not about comfort, it's about endurance, and hunger is always part of the deal. Chapter 14. Fun, Games, and the Strange Ways. People escaped misery. Despite everything, the hunger, the sickness, the freezing winters, the wars, people in the medieval world still find ways to have fun, because they have to. Life is too brutal to go without joy entirely. You need distractions, ways to forget, even for a moment, that you might be dead by next spring. Of course, medieval fun is a little different from what you might expect. There's no TikTok, no Netflix, no theme parks or video games or beach vacations. Leisure in this world is raw, physical, and usually shared with the whole village. Sometimes it's wholesome, sometimes it's horrifying, but it's never boring. Let's start with festivals. The church controls the calendar, so your year is filled with feast days. Some are religious holidays, Christmas, Easter, saints' days. Others are leftovers from old pagan traditions, rebranded to keep everyone in line. May Day is one of the big ones. Villagers gather flowers, weave garlands, and dance around the maypole. The maypole itself is, let's be honest, a giant decorated stick planted in the ground. Ribbons hang from it, and people hold the ends, weaving in and out in patterns while music plays. It's innocent enough on the surface, but May Day is also about fertility, crops growing, animals breeding, people pairing off for secret meetings in the woods. It's the one day of the year when some social rules quietly bend. Then there's midsummer, when bonfires light up the night. People jump over the flames for good luck, drink too much ale, and tell stories that blur the line between fact and myth. You might stay up until dawn, watching the horizon for the sun to rise, hoping that this year will be better than the last. But not all festivals are joyful. There's a darkness to medieval entertainment, a fascination with cruelty that runs deep. Take bear baiting, for example. A chained bear is brought into the village square, and dogs are set upon it. People cheer as the animals fight, betting on how long the bear will last or how many dogs will survive. It's not about fairness, it's about blood. Cockfighting is another favourite. 2 roosters are placed in a ring, sharpened metal spurs tied to their legs, and they're forced to fight until one of them can't stand. Children watch too, learning early that life is violent. Public executions double as entertainment. When someone is hanged, burned, or mutilated, the whole village gathers to watch. Sellers walk through the crowd with meat pies and jugs of ale, as if it's a sporting event. People bring their kids, The hangman sometimes tells jokes before the rope is pulled. It's all part of the show. Then there are the mummers, wandering performers who act out strange, half-remembered plays in the streets. Their stories mix Christian morality with old folk tales, knights fighting dragons, devils stealing souls, death walking through villages, knocking on doors. The costumes are crude, wooden masks, bits of cloth stitched together, but the crowd loves it. Music is everywhere, even if you don't have instruments. People sing while they work. They clap rhythms, stomp feet, use spoons or bones as percussion. If someone owns a lute or a pipe, they become the centre of every gathering. Dancing is wild and communal. There's no choreography, no careful footwork. Just people moving in circles, jumping, spinning, letting go of their exhaustion for a little while. Games happen too, though they're not always what you'd call safe. Mob football is a village-wide brawl with a ball at the centre. Imagine hundreds of people pushing, shoving, tackling each other through muddy fields and narrow streets, trying to get the ball to a goalpost that might be a mile away. There are no real rules. People break arms, legs, sometimes necks, but it's tradition. Gambling is everywhere. Dice games, card games, wagers on anything that moves. Some people lose their savings, or what little savings they have, in a single night. Some lose clothes, shoes, tools. A few lose their freedom, forced into labour to pay off debts. And then there's storytelling, the closest thing to a medieval movie night. In the evenings, people gather around fires. Stories pass from mouth to mouth, changing with each telling. Tales of knights and monsters, saints and sinners, lovers and ghosts. Some are cautionary, some are just for laughs. All of them serve a purpose, to escape for a few moments the heavy weight of reality. Superstition bleeds into these stories, witches hiding in plain sight, fairies stealing babies, the devil lurking at crossroads after dark. You listen, shivering a little, even when the fire is warm. Laughter happens too. Real, belly-aching laughter. People make fun of the Lord's steward when he trips in the mud. They tell dirty jokes when the priest isn't listening. They tease each other, poke fun at their own misfortunes. Because if you don't laugh, you cry. And sometimes you do cry. Life is hard, and grief is a frequent guest. But the festivals and games and stories give you a break from the grind. A moment to breathe, a reason to keep going. Because in the medieval world, survival isn't just about food or shelter. It's about finding ways to make the misery bearable. And sometimes for a few hours under the stars, with a mug of ale in hand and your friends singing beside you, it almost feels like enough. Chapter 15. Sleeping in the Middle Ages. It's nighttime now, but sleep in the medieval world doesn't come easy. You don't just crawl into a soft bed, scroll through your phone, and doze off after a few episodes of something comforting. Here, sleep is a challenge, sometimes a luxury, sometimes a battle. First, you have to find a place to do it. If you're poor, and most people are, you sleep on the floor. Maybe on a pile of straw if you're lucky enough to have some. The straw isn't clean. It'd been there for months, maybe years, matted down with sweat, dirt, crumbs, and whatever crawled in during the day. Fleas live in it. So do lice, so do mice. There's no mattress, no pillow. Sometimes you rest your head on a bundled up piece of cloth or a chunk of firewood wrapped in rags. Blankets are precious, usually shared. In the winter, your breath hangs in the air like smoke. Frost might form on the inside of the walls. You huddle together with family members, parents, children, sometimes neighbours, just to keep warm. Privacy doesn't exist. You sleep where you work, eat and live, all in the same cramped space. If you're a little wealthier, say a craftsman or a merchant, you might have a raised bed. Maybe a wooden frame with ropes or straps across it to support a thin, lumpy mattress stuffed with straw, wool, or feathers. But even then, sleep is still a group activity. Your spouse sleeps beside you. Children pile in too, especially in the cold months. Servants sometimes sleep at the foot of the bed. Personal space is a modern invention. In this world, you're never alone. You sleep in your clothes. Taking them off isn't practical, especially in winter. Undressing just means more layers to wash, more fabric to repair when it rips, and more time wasted putting it all back on at dawn. So you stay dressed. The same tunic you worked in becomes your blanket. There's no such thing as brushing your teeth before bed. You spit on the floor if you need to. No floss, no fluoride. Just gums, worn down from coarse bread, and teeth stained from years of ale and soot. And then there's the question of light. Candles are expensive. So are oil lamps. Most people don't waste them after sunset unless there's urgent work to do. The fire in the hearth is banked low, glowing softly, just enough to keep the room from freezing. Shadows stretch long and strange across the walls. The flicker of flame makes the corners of the room look like they're moving. If you need to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, you don't. Not if you can help it. There's no indoor plumbing, just a chamber pot if you're lucky. Or you step outside into the cold, squat in the dark, and hope nothing's waiting for you out there. And then there are the noises. Medieval nights are not silent. Even in the countryside, you hear things. Dogs barking, owls screeching, rats scratching in the walls. The wind pressing against the wooden slats of your home, making them creak like old bones. In towns and cities, the noises are louder, horses clopping through narrow streets, drunken voices slurring songs outside taverns, sometimes shouting, sometimes worse. And then there are the bells. Church bells ring to mark the hours, even in the middle of the night. Monasteries keep strict time. Matins, lauds, vespers. The monks rise to pray long before sunrise, pulling ropes to signal the moment. The sound rolls over the rooftops, through fields and forests, a reminder that even in sleep, God is watching. But sleep, when it finally comes, doesn't last the whole night. In the medieval world, people often experience what's called segmented sleep. First sleep begins shortly after sunset. You drift off early, exhausted from labour, maybe around 8 or 9 p.m. You sleep for a few hours and then you wake, usually around midnight. That waking period is normal, expected. People use it to stoke the fire, check on animals, or even pray. Some talk quietly with their family, some slip away for private moments. Medieval texts mention that this is a common time for intimacy between spouses. Others simply lie in the dark, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the night. After an hour or two of quiet wakefulness, second sleep begins. This sleep is deeper, often filled with stranger dreams. Medieval people believed the night was a bridge between this world and another, a liminal space where spirits moved freely. Dreams were sometimes thought to be messages from beyond, or warnings from saints, or tricks from the devil. You try not to think about that as you settle back into sleep. If you're lucky, the second sleep carries you until dawn. If you're not, you wake often, from cold or hunger, or the aches of a body worn down by labour. There are no soft mattresses to cradle your joints. No painkillers for your bad back. Just the slow, constant reminder that your body is mortal, that it's aging faster than it should, and that life is a brief, brutal stretch of time between birth and death. Still, you sleep anyway, because you must, because you have to face the next day. And when the rooster crows, or the church bell tolls for morning prayers, you open your eyes in the grey light of dawn. Another day begins, and you'll do it all over again. Chapter 16. Death, the afterlife, and the quiet acceptance of it all. In the medieval world, death isn't something you think about once in a while. It's everywhere, all the time. You don't reach old age and suddenly contemplate mortality. You grow up knowing that death is part of daily life. You've seen it since you were small. Neighbours, friends, family members, animals in the field, strangers on the roadside. Death isn't something that happens to other people. It's something that happens to everyone, usually sooner rather than later. There are no hospitals to save you, no emergency rooms, no doctors with clean coats and advanced tools. Medical care, if you can call it that, is a mixture of herbs, prayers, and guesswork. Sometimes you're bled with leeches, sometimes you're wrapped in poultices made of moss or pig fat. Sometimes they drill a hole in your skull to let out the bad humours. It usually doesn't work. When you get sick, you start preparing for the end right away. That's what everyone does. You confess your sins just in case. A priest is called, not to heal you, but to help you die properly. You're anointed with oil, given last rites. If you can, you settle debts, say goodbye to your family, and make peace with God. If you can't afford a priest, or if there isn't one nearby, you do the best you can on your own. Whisper prayers into the dark. Hold on to a rosary or a charm, or whatever you believe might help guide your soul safely out of your body. Death isn't seen as a single event. It's a process, a passage. You go from this life into the next, and where you end up depends on how you lived. Maybe you go to heaven if you're lucky and pure. Most people don't expect that. Not right away. More likely, you'll spend time in purgatory, a long, slow cleansing of the soul, where the flames are real but temporary. People on earth pray for you, hoping to shorten your stay. Masses are said, candles are lit, your name is spoken softly in churches. If you're truly wicked or simply unlucky, you fear hell, eternal fire, endless torment. In medieval sermons, hell isn't a metaphor. It's a real place described in vivid, terrifying detail. Demons with hooks and chains, rivers of boiling pitch, gnashing teeth and wailing souls. But mostly, you hope for mercy. That's what medieval life teaches you. To hope for a better harvest, for good weather, for another day of health, for God's forgiveness at the end of it all. Death comes in many forms. Sometimes it's sudden, a fall from a horse, a misstep near a cliff, a knife in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes it's slow, a wasting disease that eats away at you for months, leaving you thinner and thinner until your bones press against your skin. Sometimes it's violent, war, plague, famine. Other times it's quiet, a final breath, a stillness, and then nothing. But death isn't always feared. Sometimes it's welcomed. When life is hard, death feels like rest, a release from hunger, from cold, from constant labour. The church promises paradise, a place without pain, without work, without suffering, streets of gold, choirs of angels, a feast that never ends. You think about that when your stomach growls at night. You think about it when you bury another child in the frozen ground, when you hear the tolling bell, calling for another funeral, when you pass the plague pits and smell the air thick with decay. You think, maybe it'll be better after this. The church walls are covered in paintings to remind you of your fate. The danse macabre, the dance of death, shows kings, peasants, priests and children, all hand in hand with skeletons. No one escapes. Not even the wealthy. Not even the holy. Death is the great equalizer. The cemetery isn't far away. It never is. You walk past it daily, nodding quietly toward the stones, knowing you'll be there soon enough. But you don't dwell on it constantly. You live your life. You laugh when you can. You dance on feast days. You drink ale with friends. Tell stories by the fire. Watch the sun rise over the fields. You pull weeds from the garden. You bake bread. You kiss your children goodnight. Because life, even when it's miserable, is still life. And when death comes, because it always does, you close your eyes and let go. No machines, no wires, no beeping monitors, just breath, fading, a candle burning low, a soul slipping quietly from one world into another. The house will be silent for a moment. Then someone will tend the fire, gather the family, begin the prayers, and life will go on. Chapter 17, Magic, Superstition, and Things that Go Bump in the Medieval Nights. When the sun goes down, in the medieval world, the dark feels heavier than it does now. It's not just the absence of light, it's the presence of something else, something unseen, something waiting. Because in this world, night doesn't just belong to sleep, it belongs to spirits. Demons, witches, ghosts, and whether you believe in them or not, you act like you do. Everyone does. The church tells you to fear the devil, but before the devil, there were older fears. Whispers passed down through generations, stories about creatures in the woods, curses in the wind, shadows with teeth. You live in a world where science doesn't explain much of anything. Medicine is superstition. Weather is punishment or reward. A good harvest means God is pleased. A bad one, someone probably angered a spirit, or maybe the village witch got involved again. Witches are real according to most people. They're not green-skinned or flying on broomsticks. That part comes later, in fairy tales. Here, a witch might be your neighbour, the woman who talks to her goats too much. The old man who knows which herbs help with childbirth, the widow who lives alone at the edge of the village, gathering plants at dawn. People watch them out of the corners of their eyes. They don't accuse without reason, not usually, but they always wonder. If a cow dies suddenly, you look toward the strange woman in the next hut. If a baby is born sick, you wonder if someone cast the evil eye. Charms are everywhere. You keep one in your pocket maybe, a bit of bone, a dried root, a tiny bag of salt or herbs. You hang amulets over the doorway to keep out bad spirits. You carve crosses into bread before baking it. Just in case, you spit 3 times over your left shoulder to ward off the devil. You never, ever walk home by the graveyard after dark. Dreams are messages. A crow flying east in the morning is a bad sign. A dog howling at night means someone will die. A black cat crossing your path. That one's complicated, but you try to avoid it anyway. People tell stories of changelings. Babies stolen by fairies, replaced with sickly, shriveled copies. If a child cries too much, looks different, or fails to grow, people get suspicious. The midwife might recommend leaving the baby out overnight, hoping the fairies will take it back and return the real one. You don't like to think about that, but you've heard it happen. There are stories about the wild hunt too, ghostly horsemen sweeping through the night sky, chasing souls or stealing the unwary. If you hear galloping in the distance when no one's around, you hide. You don't look up. You don't breathe too loud. Then there are the revenants, the restless dead, not quiet, peaceful ghosts, but angry ones. Bodies that get out of graves and cause trouble. People believe it happens, especially when someone dies suddenly or improperly buried. There are records of villagers digging up corpses and cutting off their heads to stop them from coming back. And if you live near a forest, and you probably do, you believe it has its own rules. The woods are places of magic. Some plants are safe to gather, others aren't. Certain trees are sacred, even now, long after the old gods were replaced by Christian saints. You might still whisper thanks when you take firewood. You don't cut certain branches after sunset. You don't whistle in the forest because that might summon something that whistles back. Holy water is your shield. So are prayers, but sometimes you hedge your bets and use old remedies too. Things passed down before the church arrived. A pinch of ash in the corner of your house, iron nails hidden in the door frame to ward off evil. People live in fear, but also in awe of the unseen world, because when you don't have science, you fill in the blanks with stories, and those stories become part of you. You tell them to your children by firelight. You carve them into the margins of prayer books. You paint demons on church walls, not just to frighten, but to explain. Why do bad things happen? Because the world is full of things you can't see. That's the logic of medieval life. And when you wake in the middle of the night, in that long gap between first sleep and second sleep, you lie still and listen to the wind, to the creaking wood beams overhead, to the low hum of things moving just beyond your door. You don't ask too many questions, you just pull the blanket up to your chin and you wait for morning. Chapter 18. The Quiet Drift. Back to now. And now, dear traveller, we've reached the end of our journey. You've survived another night in the medieval world. Or at least you've imagined it. You've woken before dawn, toiled in the fields, endured hunger, stumbled through mud-soaked roads, past flickering fires, and whispered superstitions. You've watched the days pass under the weight of labour, and the nights stretch long and uneasy, and yet you're still here. Of course you're not really trapped in the past. You're safe right now, wherever you are, wrapped in soft blankets, in a warm bed, in a room protected from the cold and the dark. There's no black death at your door, no famine, no wolves in the woods, no tolling church bells breaking the silence of the night, just you and the steady rhythm of your own breathing. It's strange, isn't it, to think of how far we've come, how soft modern life is compared to the lives of those who came before us, and how easy it is to forget that, for most of human history, life was brutal, short and uncertain, but tonight you've remembered. And now you can let that memory fade, like mist at dawn. You can leave the medieval world behind, let the village streets disappear, let the scratchy straw bed dissolve, let the cold nights and muddy mornings drift away. Right now, there's nothing left for you to do. No labour, no hunger, no danger, just stillness. Take a deep breath if you like. Let it out slowly. Feel the weight of your body sink into the mattress. Let your muscles unclench, one by one. Your shoulders, your jaw, your hands. The world of medieval hardship is slipping from you now, like a dream you won't need to remember in the morning. And sleep is coming, softly, quietly, without pain, without fear. I'll stay here, keeping watch, as you drift farther and farther away. Thank you for spending your evening with me. Wherever you are in the world, and whatever time it is where you are, I hope this night gives you the deep, restful sleep you deserve. Good night, traveller. We'll meet again soon. The texture suggests they've been cooking for several days, possibly in the same pot, absorbing flavours from previous meals until they achieve a uniform blandness that transcends their original identity. You eat methodically, not because the food provides pleasure, but because your body requires fuel for the hours of proceedings that remain ahead. Each spoonful settles into your stomach with the weight of necessity rather than satisfaction. The warmth of the liquid provides temporary relief from the persistent chill that has settled into the meeting house as evening temperatures drop, but the nutritional value seems questionable at best. Around you, other officials consume their portions with the same resigned efficiency that characterises all survival activities in 1692. Conversations during the meal focus on practical matters rather than the pleasure of dining. Someone mentions that their portion contains fewer vegetables than usual. Another person notes that the meat seems tougher today than yesterday. These observations carry no expectation of improvement or complaint, merely the acknowledgement of conditions that must be endured. The bread that accompanies the stew has the density of building material and the flavour of something that was created more for sustenance than enjoyment. Each piece requires considerable chewing to break down into manageable portions, and the texture remains grainy and resistant even after extended mastication. The crust shows dark spots that might be intentional browning or might be evidence of less controlled baking processes. Water remains available in the same wooden buckets that have served throughout the day, its brown tint now familiar enough to seem normal. The liquid carries the taste of wood and whatever minerals have leached from the storage containers over time. Each drink requires a conscious decision to ignore the subtle flavours that would be concerning in a modern context but represent the normal characteristics of available water sources. The dining process itself takes place in the same room where the day's proceedings have unfolded, creating an atmosphere where serious deliberations pause temporarily for physical maintenance before resuming. The gravity of the afternoon's testimony lingers in the air, making it difficult to treat the meal as a genuine break from the psychological pressure of the work. Even during this brief respite, the responsibility for making life or death decisions remains present in the background. Physical discomfort continues during the meal, despite the opportunity to shift positions and adjust seating arrangements. The wooden benches provide no improvement in comfort when used for dining rather than deliberation. Backs that have ached throughout the day continue to protest against the sustained sitting required for consuming the evening meal. The temporary change in activity provides little relief from the accumulated physical stress of the extended session. The lighting conditions during dinner rely entirely on candles and oil lamps, creating a dim atmosphere that makes it difficult to examine food thoroughly before consumption. This limitation affects not only the ability to identify questionable portions, but also the social interactions that normally accompany shared meals. Faces appear shadowed and indistinct, making it challenging to read expressions or maintain eye contact during conversations. Someone mentions that tomorrow's session will likely involve additional cases that have been accumulating while today's proceedings continue. This reminder that the current day represents only one installment in an ongoing series of similar sessions adds to the psychological burden that affects even routine activities like eating. The knowledge that tomorrow will bring identical challenges creates a sense of endless repetition that drains enthusiasm for simple pleasures. The temperature variations that have affected the day's proceedings continue during the meal, with those seated near the heating fire experiencing excessive warmth, while others in distant parts of the room must manage persistent cold. These disparities affect not only physical comfort, but also the ability to enjoy what little pleasure the food might provide. Hot soup becomes overwhelming for those already too warm, while remaining unappetizingly cool for those in colder areas. Conversation during the meal occasionally touches on the day's proceedings, despite general reluctance to discuss work during the brief respite. Someone mentions a particularly challenging piece of testimony that required extensive analysis. Another person notes the complexity of evaluating contradictory witness statements. These professional discussions intrude on what should be personal time, demonstrating how the demands of the work penetrate every aspect of daily experience. The utensils used for consuming the meal continue to present the same challenges encountered during breakfast. Wooden spoons with rough surfaces and inadequate shapes make it difficult to consume liquid efficiently. The implements require constant attention to prevent spillage, adding another layer of complexity to an activity that should provide relaxation and restoration. Simple tasks like eating become exercises in concentration and careful coordination. Physical symptoms of the day's stress become more noticeable during the meal as attention shifts from external demands to internal sensations. Headaches that developed during afternoon proceedings intensify in the dimmer lighting conditions. Muscle tension in the neck and shoulders becomes more apparent when not distracted by the intellectual demands of evaluating testimony. The temporary reduction in mental demands allows physical discomfort to claim greater attention. The social dynamics of the evening meal reflect the hierarchical structures that govern all aspects of the proceedings. Seating arrangements follow established patterns based on role and status within the judicial system. Conversations flow according to social protocols that determine who speaks first and who responds to different topics. Even this brief personal time remains structured by the formal relationships that define professional interactions. Someone coughs persistently throughout the meal, the sound echoing in the enclosed space and creating distraction for others trying to eat. The acoustic properties of the meeting house amplify individual sounds, making it impossible to ignore the physical symptoms that others are experiencing. This reminder of shared physical discomfort reinforces the collective nature of the challenges being faced by everyone involved in the proceedings. The meal concludes with the understanding that evening sessions will resume shortly, bringing additional cases that require the same level of detailed analysis and careful deliberation that characterized the day's earlier proceedings. The brief respite provided by eating serves more as a necessary pause for physical maintenance than as genuine relief from the psychological pressure of the work. The transition back to official duties feels inevitable and immediate, despite the temporary interruption. Chapter 11. The evening shift of moral destruction. As the meal concludes and evening proceedings prepare to resume, a profound weariness settles over the entire assembly that goes beyond simple physical fatigue. The accumulated weight of the day's decisions begins to manifest as a deeper exhaustion that affects not just the body, but the fundamental processes of moral reasoning and ethical judgment. Hours of deliberating life or death questions based on questionable evidence have created a state of mental erosion that challenges the very foundations of rational decision-making. The first case of the evening session involves accusations against an elderly woman whose primary crime appears to be living alone and maintaining a garden that produces vegetables slightly larger than her neighbours. The testimony against her follows familiar patterns: suspicious behaviour, unusual success with crops, and the kind of social isolation that breeds community suspicion. But after hours of similar cases, the routine nature of the accusations creates a numbing effect that makes it difficult to approach each situation with the fresh perspective it deserves. Witness testimony begins with detailed observations of the woman's daily routines, presented as evidence of supernatural activity. Her habit of rising before dawn to tend her garden becomes proof of unusual energy levels that suggest supernatural enhancement. Her ability to predict weather changes based on years of agricultural experience transforms into evidence of supernatural knowledge. The efficiency with which she manages household tasks without assistance indicates either remarkable competence or otherworldly aid, and the current interpretive framework favours the latter explanation. The mental processes required for evaluating this testimony operate with diminished effectiveness after hours of similar analysis. Pattern recognition systems that seemed sharp during morning proceedings now generate responses more slowly and with less confidence. The ability to distinguish between meaningful evidence and coincidental correlation becomes compromised when the analytical framework has been applied repeatedly to situations where correlation was consistently interpreted as causation. Physical evidence in this case includes vegetables from the woman's garden that show unusual size and quality compared to typical local produce. These specimens, arranged on the table for examination, represent either exceptional gardening skills or supernatural enhancement of agricultural processes. The framework for evaluation has been established through previous cases where unusual success was attributed to supernatural assistance rather than superior technique or favourable growing conditions. The responsibility for determining whether gardening excellence constitutes evidence of supernatural corruption weighs heavily on decision makers whose judgment has been compromised by accumulated fatigue and repeated exposure to similar accusations. The ability to maintain objective evaluation becomes increasingly difficult when every case follows similar patterns and previous decisions have established precedents that favour supernatural explanations for exceptional performance. Temperature conditions within the meeting house continue to affect concentration and decision-making ability. The uneven heat distribution creates physical discomfort that interferes with mental processes already compromised by sustained stress and inadequate nutrition. Cold conditions increase muscle tension and reduce fine motor control, making it difficult to maintain legible notes, while poor circulation affects cognitive function and reaction time. The lighting conditions during evening proceedings rely entirely on artificial illumination that creates variable visibility and eye strain. Candle flames flicker constantly, creating moving shadows that make it difficult to examine evidence thoroughly or maintain focus on detailed testimony. The poor lighting quality affects not only the ability to read documents and observe evidence, but also the capacity to interpret facial expressions and body language during witness testimony. Additional testimony emerges regarding the accused woman's social interactions, presented as evidence of supernatural influence on community relationships. Her tendency to avoid large social gatherings become proof of antisocial behaviour consistent with supernatural corruption. Her preference for solitary activities indicates either natural introversion or deliberate isolation for supernatural purposes. The interpretive framework consistently favours explanations that support accusations rather than alternatives that might suggest innocence. The accumulation of similar cases throughout the day creates a mental template that affects the evaluation of new evidence. Previous decisions establish expectations about what constitutes sufficient proof of supernatural activity, and these precedents influence current deliberations in ways that may not be entirely appropriate. The consistency of interpretive approaches across multiple cases provides procedural uniformity, but may also perpetuate analytical errors that become embedded in the decision-making process. Witness credibility assessment becomes more difficult as the evening progresses and evaluative faculties become compromised by fatigue and sensory limitations. The ability to detect inconsistencies in testimony or identify potential motivations for false accusations requires mental resources that have been depleted through hours of intensive analysis. Physical symptoms of stress affect concentration and memory, making it harder to compare current statements with previous testimony or identify patterns that might indicate coordinated false accusations. The psychological impact of making repeated decisions about life or death matters begins to manifest as emotional numbing that affects the ability to appreciate the gravity of individual cases. What should be careful deliberation about serious accusations becomes routine processing of similar evidence according to established patterns. The human capacity for sustained moral engagement becomes overwhelmed by the repetitive nature of the decisions and the emotional weight of their consequences. Documentation requirements continue throughout the evening proceedings, despite deteriorating physical conditions and compromised mental functioning. Written records must maintain consistent accuracy and legibility regardless of hand cramps, poor lighting, or the psychological stress of recording decisions that will determine whether people live or die. The persistence of administrative demands creates additional pressure that compounds the existing challenges. The social dynamics within the meeting house reflect the accumulated tension of a day spent making grave decisions under difficult conditions. Interactions between officials become more formal and less collaborative as fatigue reduces patience and social tolerance. The collegial atmosphere that might normally characterize professional deliberations gives way to mechanistic processing of cases according to established procedures rather than thoughtful analysis of individual circumstances. Evening testimony continues with additional witnesses providing supporting evidence for the accusations under consideration. Each new statement adds complexity to cases that seemed straightforward during initial presentation, but the mental resources required for processing this additional information operate at reduced capacity. The ability to integrate new evidence with previous testimony becomes compromised when cognitive function is impaired by fatigue, poor environmental conditions, and psychological stress. The persistence of poor environmental conditions throughout the extended proceedings creates cumulative effects that compound over time rather than remaining constant. Cold temperatures affect manual dexterity and cognitive processing. Poor lighting strains visual systems already fatigued by hours of careful reading. Acoustic conditions make it difficult to hear testimony clearly, forcing mental compensation that increases cognitive load. The combination of multiple environmental stressors creates conditions that severely challenge human performance capabilities. Chapter 12: Night Court: When Exhaustion Meets Evil. The transition into full darkness outside the meeting house marks the beginning of what experienced officials know to be the most challenging phase of any extended session. Night proceedings carry their own particular burdens that go beyond the accumulated fatigue of the day. The psychological weight of deliberating matters of life and death becomes more oppressive when conducted in the shadowy, candlelit atmosphere that transforms the familiar meeting house into something resembling a medieval tribunal from the darkest periods of human history. The case currently under consideration involves a middle-aged man whose wife died suddenly 3 months ago and whose neighbours have begun to suspect that her death was not natural. The testimony against him centres on observations of his behaviour following her death, interpreted through the lens of supernatural suspicion rather than normal grief responses. His failure to remarry quickly suggests either unusual devotion to his deceased wife or deliberate avoidance of normal social relationships for supernatural reasons. Witness statements describe the man's tendency to speak aloud when alone in his house, behaviour that neighbours have observed through windows during evening hours. This practice, which might represent normal expressions of grief or simple habits of solitary individuals, becomes evidence of communication with supernatural entities when viewed through the established interpretive framework. The natural human tendency to vocalize thoughts when alone transforms into proof of otherworldly contact. The physical evidence in this case includes items from the deceased woman's personal effects that show unusual wear patterns or discoloration. Clothing that displays the normal effects of extended use and environmental exposure becomes proof of supernatural interference with material objects. Jewellery that shows natural tarnishing from skin contact and atmospheric conditions transforms into evidence of supernatural corruption affecting personal ornaments. Medical testimony, such as it exists in 1692, describes the woman's final illness in terms that suggest either natural disease progression or supernatural intervention. The absence of clear understanding about disease processes creates interpretive space where supernatural explanations compete equally with natural causes. Symptoms that would be easily recognized as common illnesses in later centuries become ambiguous evidence that could support either natural or supernatural explanations for death. The evaluation of this testimony requires mental processes that have been severely compromised by the accumulated stresses of the extended session. Decision-making faculties that seemed adequate during morning proceedings now operate with reduced effectiveness, affecting the ability to weigh evidence objectively or maintain consistent standards of evaluation. The responsibility for determining whether grief behaviour constitutes evidence of supernatural guilt creates psychological pressure that further impairs cognitive function. Candlelight provides the sole illumination for examining evidence and observing witness testimony during night proceedings. The flickering flames create constantly changing shadows that make it difficult to examine physical evidence thoroughly or interpret facial expressions accurately. Documents become harder to read as eye strain accumulates from hours of inadequate lighting conditions. The visual fatigue affects not only immediate perception, but also the ability to recall details from earlier testimony when making comparative analyses. Temperature control becomes increasingly problematic as outdoor conditions change and the heating fire requires constant attention to maintain adequate warmth. The uneven heat distribution that created discomfort during earlier proceedings becomes more pronounced as the temperature differential between heated and unheated areas increases. Physical discomfort from cold conditions affects concentration and decision-making ability, while excessive heat near the fire creates different but equally problematic conditions for those positioned nearby. The acoustic environment during night proceedings presents additional challenges for maintaining focus and processing information effectively. Sound travels differently in the enclosed space when outside noises diminish with nightfall, creating an atmosphere where every small noise becomes more noticeable and potentially distracting. The heightened awareness of minor sounds affects concentration, while conversations and testimony seem unnaturally loud in the quiet environment. Additional witnesses provide testimony about the accused man's activities during the weeks following his wife's death, presented as evidence of supernatural involvement in her demise. His decision to continue farming activities without seeking assistance suggests either remarkable resilience or supernatural aid in managing physical demands. His ability to maintain household routines without female assistance indicates competence that exceeds normal expectations for men in this community, creating suspicion about the source of his capabilities. The interpretive framework applied to this evidence operates according to patterns established through previous cases, but the decision-maker's ability to apply these frameworks consistently becomes compromised by fatigue and environmental stress. Pattern recognition systems that functioned adequately during earlier proceedings now generate responses more slowly and with less confidence. The accumulated mental fatigue affects both the speed and accuracy of analytical processes required for thorough evaluation. Documentation of night proceedings requires maintaining written records under conditions that make legible handwriting increasingly difficult to achieve. Poor lighting affects the ability to see what is being written, while hand cramps from extended writing sessions reduce fine motor control. The combination of visual and physical limitations creates challenges for maintaining the detailed records required for these serious proceedings. But administrative standards cannot be compromised regardless of practical difficulties. The social dynamics during night sessions reflect the accumulated stress and fatigue that affect all participants in the proceedings. Interactions become more formal and less collaborative as reduced social tolerance combines with the psychological pressure of making grave decisions under challenging conditions. The collegial atmosphere that might characterize normal professional deliberations gives way to mechanistic processing designed to complete necessary work despite compromised human performance. Psychological effects of sustained decision-making about life or death matters begin to manifest as emotional disconnection that affects the ability to maintain appropriate gravity about individual cases. The human capacity for sustained moral engagement becomes overwhelmed by repetitive exposure to similar accusations and the cumulative weight of previous decisions. What should represent careful deliberation about serious matters transforms into routine application of established procedures to familiar patterns of evidence. The persistence of multiple environmental stressors creates cumulative effects that become more pronounced during night proceedings when human performance typically reaches its lowest point. Cold temperatures affect manual dexterity and cognitive processing speed. Poor lighting creates visual strain that interferes with document review and evidence examination. Acoustic conditions require additional mental effort to process testimony clearly. The combination of these factors creates conditions that would challenge anyone's ability to maintain peak performance. Physical symptoms of extended stress become more apparent during night proceedings as the body's natural rhythms reach their lowest point. Headaches intensify in the dim lighting conditions, while muscle tension accumulates in areas subjected to sustained stress throughout the day. Digestive issues from poor nutrition and irregular eating patterns affect concentration and comfort. The accumulated physical effects of the extended session create additional challenges that compound the existing difficulties of the work itself. The responsibility for rendering judgments that will determine whether people live or die becomes more psychologically burdensome during night proceedings when natural circadian rhythms reduce alertness and emotional regulation. The weight of these decisions affects not only professional performance but also personal well-being, creating stress that extends beyond the immediate demands of the work into broader questions about the moral implications of the judicial system itself. Chapter 13. The Final Hour. As the deepest part of night settles over Salem, you find yourself confronting the stark reality of why no modern person could survive even these first 24 hours as a witch hunter. Your body has been systematically broken down by conditions that would challenge the hardiest medieval constitution, while your mind has been twisted by moral complexities that would drive contemporary ethicists to despair. The final case of your first day involves a young mother whose infant has been crying persistently for several weeks. The community has determined that such prolonged distress in a baby can only result from supernatural interference, either through the mother's corruption or external curse. You must now decide whether maternal exhaustion and normal infant development constitute evidence worthy of execution. Your hands shake as you attempt to write final notes, not from supernatural fear, but from the accumulated physical toll of a day spent in conditions that would violate every modern standard of workplace safety and human dignity. The rough wooden pen has worn blisters on your fingers that burst hours ago, leaving raw skin in contact with crude materials. Your back screams in protest against the wooden bench that has provided your only seating for nearly 18 hours of sustained deliberation. The candlelight that illuminates this final testimony flickers weakly. The wax pool's nearly exhausted after burning throughout the extended session. In this dying light, you must examine baby clothes presented as evidence of supernatural marking, interpreting the normal stains and wear patterns of infant garments as potential proof of otherworldly influence. Your eyes, strained beyond endurance by hours of inadequate illumination, can barely focus on the details that supposedly distinguish supernatural corruption from the normal chaos of caring for a newborn. The young mother stands before you, swaying with exhaustion that mirrors your own. Her crime appears to be the inability to soothe her child consistently, a failure that the community interprets as either evidence of supernatural curse or proof of her own corruption. In your compromised state, you must somehow distinguish between the normal challenges of early parenthood and supernatural malevolence, using criteria that would seem absurd to anyone with basic understanding of child development. Your stomach churns from the combination of poor nutrition and accumulated stress, reminding you that you have consumed nothing but questionable porridge and mystery stew over the course of this marathon session. The constant low-level nausea affects your concentration, while hunger pangs compete with moral anguish for your attention. Modern people accustomed to regular, nutritious meals would find their cognitive function severely impaired by such dietary deprivation. The testimony drags on with neighbours describing the infant's crying patterns as evidence of supernatural distress. Normal infant behaviour becomes sinister when interpreted through the lens of supernatural suspicion, while the mother's exhaustion and occasional frustration transform into proof of either supernatural corruption or inadequate maternal devotion. You realise that you're being asked to apply death penalty standards to the challenges of new parenthood, using evidence that wouldn't convince a modern family court to issue a parking ticket. Your decision-making capacity, already compromised by nearly 20 hours of sustained stress, faces its ultimate test in determining whether this mother and child represent a supernatural threat requiring immediate action. The responsibility weighs on shoulders that ache from maintaining rigid posture throughout the endless session, while your mind struggles to process complex moral questions using cognitive resources depleted by sustained overuse. The other officials around you show similar signs of complete exhaustion, their faces drawn with fatigue that goes beyond simple tiredness into the realm of genuine physical and mental breakdown. Together you represent a group of people pushed far beyond normal human limitations, expected to make life or death decisions while operating under conditions that would challenge basic survival instincts. As you attempt to render final judgment on this case, the accumulated weight of the day's decisions crashes down with full force. You have spent 24 hours determining whether normal human behaviour constitutes evidence of supernatural evil, using analytical frameworks that transform ordinary life into constant threat. The cornhusk dolls, the grooming cats, the successful gardens, the crying babies, all have been evaluated as potential evidence worthy of execution. Your modern mind, trained to seek rational explanations and evidence-based conclusions, has been forced to operate in a system where coincidence equals causation and unusual equals evil. The psychological damage from a single day of such work would require extensive therapy to address, while the physical toll would take weeks of recovery under proper medical care. The candle finally gutters out completely, leaving you in darkness, broken only by the dying embers of the heating fire. In this darkness, you must complete your final deliberations about whether a tired mother deserves to live, while your own exhausted body and mind provide clear evidence of why you wouldn't survive another day of such work. You have experienced why no modern person could last 24 hours as a witch hunter in Salem. Not because of supernatural threats or physical danger, but because the combination of impossible moral demands, devastating physical conditions, and complete absence of rational frameworks would destroy both body and soul long before any witch could be found. As the first grey light of dawn begins to filter through the windows, you realise that you have somehow survived your first day, but at a cost that would take years to recover from fully. Your hands can barely hold the pen. Your back screams with pain, your eyes burn from strain, and your mind reels from the weight of decisions that will haunt you forever. This is why you wouldn't survive as a witch hunter in Salem. Not in 24 hours, not in 24 minutes. The job would break you completely, leaving you as much a victim of the madness as anyone accused of consorting with darkness. The morning light grows stronger, and you understand that somewhere in this community, decisions made in this room will soon be carried out. The thought settles over you like a blanket of lead, and you realise that even if your body survived the physical demands, your soul might not survive the moral ones. Welcome to Salem 1692. You wouldn't last a day. And now, as dawn breaks over this dark chapter of human history, let your own eyes grow heavy. Let the weight of this long night settle into your comfortable bed. Feel the relief of knowing that these terrible decisions exist only in the past, and drift into peaceful sleep, grateful for the soft pillows beneath your head, the warm blankets around you, and the gentle darkness that brings not judgment but rest.